Rebecca Carmichael had always been the perfect wife, the devoted mother, and the picture of suburban tranquility. Tom, her husband of 23 years, never suspected that beneath her flawless exterior, Rebecca was hiding a dangerous secret. Their son, Alex, adored his girlfriend, Emily, unaware that Emily had become not just a part of their family, but the center of a deadly affair that would unravel everything. In one moment of uncontrolled rage, Rebecca's world shattered, and the Carmichaels' once perfect life was torn apart. What happened behind their closed doors would change their family forever, leading to a crime that no one saw coming. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the Carmichael family seemed to have it all. Tom, the father, was a successful businessman, always dressed impeccably and known for his punctuality. Rebecca, his wife, was the epitome of a loving homemaker, gracious, kind, and always volunteering for school events or organizing family gatherings. Their son, Alex, was an overachiever, excelling in both academics and sports. The Carmichaels were the kind of family everyone envied, always smiling in pictures, always holding themselves together. Their house, a large colonial with white picket fences and a manicured lawn, was the perfect representation of the life they led. It was the type of home people could only dream of, the one they hoped to raise their children in, where every day felt like a holiday. But behind this carefully constructed image, there were cracks no one could see. Rebecca, although seemingly fulfilled in her role as a mother and wife, was harboring a secret that would soon unravel everything she had built. She and Tom had been married for more than 20 years, and on the surface their relationship appeared solid. They had raised Alex together and celebrated every milestone as a family. Yet, over the last few years, something had begun to shift. The chemistry that once existed between Rebecca and Tom had slowly faded, replaced by routine and indifference. Tom, wrapped up in his business pursuits, had become less attentive. Rebecca, on the other hand, began to feel a longing she couldn't ignore, a deep yearning for something she couldn't define. It started innocently enough. Rebecca had met Emily, Alex's girlfriend, at a family barbecue. Emily was charming, confident, and youthful. She was everything that Rebecca had once been: full of energy, excited for the future, and carefree. At first, their conversations were nothing more than polite exchanges about Alex's progress in school or small talk about the weather. But over time, Rebecca noticed something in Emily's eyes, a certain familiarity, a shared understanding. It was as if, beneath the surface, Emily was searching for something just as Rebecca was. Emily's presence made Rebecca feel young again, alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The connection grew gradually, almost imperceptibly. They started spending more time together, first at family gatherings, then at private meetings under the guise of casual friendship. Rebecca couldn't pinpoint when it shifted from a friendly bond to something more complicated. At first, it was a simple touch, Emily's hand brushing hers as they passed a plate of food, or her fingers lingering a moment too long when passing a drink. Then, there were the late-night text messages, the brief but lingering glances across the room that seemed to speak volumes. It was subtle, at first, but soon the attraction between them became undeniable. Rebecca struggled with her feelings. She knew this wasn't just an innocent crush. This was something far more intense. She began to look forward to their private moments, the secret conversations they shared that no one else could hear. Emily, too, seemed to sense the chemistry between them, though she never spoke of it directly. Instead, their bond grew deeper with each passing day, weaving a tangled web of desire and guilt. Rebecca knew she was risking everything: the life she had built with Tom, the trust she had cultivated with Alex, but she couldn't stop herself. Every stolen moment with Emily felt like a breath of fresh air, a chance to be seen and understood in a way she hadn't been for years. As the affair deepened, so did Rebecca's internal conflict. On the outside, she maintained the image of the perfect wife and mother. She continued to manage the household, plan family dinners, and attend Alex's school events. But inside, she was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions: love, guilt, fear. The affair with Emily was not something she had planned, nor something she had ever expected, but now that it had started, Rebecca couldn't imagine life without it. The question of how long she could keep her secret from Tom and Alex began to weigh heavily on her. Yet with every passing day, she found it harder to imagine a world where Emily wasn't a part of it. As weeks passed, Rebecca's relationship with Emily deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. What had started as a flirtation, a secret escape from her seemingly perfect life, had blossomed into something far more consuming. It was no longer just a brief encounter or a stolen moment here and there. It was an emotional connection, an undeniable pull that Rebecca found both thrilling and terrifying. Emily wasn't just another affair, she was becoming the center of Rebecca's world, an obsession that Rebecca couldn't control, even if she had wanted to. Their meetings became more frequent. At first, they found excuses to meet under the pretense of catching up a simple coffee or a quick conversation while Tom and Alex were out of the house. But soon, even these excuses seemed insufficient. Rebecca started planning her days around these meetings, sneaking away from her family to be with Emily. It wasn't long before their connection moved beyond texts and whispered conversations to full-blown meetings behind closed doors. Emily's presence was like a drug Rebecca couldn't quit, and with every moment spent together, she fell further down a path she knew was dangerous. Rebecca began to grow distant from Tom, though he didn't immediately notice. She was careful to keep up appearances, maintaining the usual rhythm of their daily lives, but beneath the surface, she had become less engaged. Tom noticed her increased irritability, her distracted mood, but he chalked it up to the stress of everyday life. The years of their marriage had created a routine, and Tom, consumed by his business, was blind to the shifting undercurrents of Rebecca's emotions. It was easier for him to dismiss her coldness as just a phase, a temporary period of distance in their relationship. But Rebecca's emotional state was anything but temporary. She was no longer just the wife and mother everyone thought she was. The woman who had once been the heart of the Carmichael home now found herself torn between the life she had and the life she was craving. She would lie awake at night, her mind racing, thinking of Emily's smile, her laugh, the warmth of her touch. It was as if every moment of her day was consumed by thoughts of the younger woman, and her guilt over the betrayal she was committing became a constant companion. At the same time, Emily was becoming more assertive, more demanding. What had once been a quiet affair began to shift into something more controlling. Emily, while outwardly calm and collected, started to push boundaries in ways that unsettled Rebecca. It wasn't enough for Emily to simply be the lover in secret. She wanted more. She wanted Rebecca's full attention, her complete devotion. Emily would send long messages late into the night, demanding to know where Rebecca was, who she was with. It was as if she was staking her claim on Rebecca, making it clear that she expected more than just a fleeting affair. Rebecca began to feel the weight of these expectations. What had started as a liberating escape from her mundane life had turned into a suffocating obligation. The secrecy of it all, the constant hiding and sneaking around, began to take its toll. Rebecca was constantly on edge, jumping at every noise, afraid that Tom or Alex would find out. She started avoiding family gatherings, citing work or errands as excuses to get away. But in the back of her mind, she knew the inevitable was coming, that one day someone would find out. And when they did, everything would come crashing down. But even with this looming threat, Rebecca couldn't stop herself. Emily had become too important to her. Alex, meanwhile, was growing more concerned with his mother's behavior. He had always been close to Rebecca, and he couldn't ignore the subtle changes he saw in her. She was more withdrawn, more distant. He noticed that she often seemed lost in thought, and there were days when she would barely speak at all. Alex didn't know what was wrong, but he sensed something was off. He had no idea that the woman he trusted most in the world was hiding a devastating secret, one that would soon tear their family apart. As the tension in the Carmichael home continued to build, Rebecca found herself trapped. The affair was no longer just about passion or desire, it was about power and control. Emily had a hold over her, one that was impossible to break. Rebecca had crossed a line she never thought she would, and now there was no turning back. It was late one evening when Tom found the first crack in Rebecca's carefully constructed facade. He had been at work all day, as usual, and when he returned home, he was tired and eager to relax. The house was quieter than usual, and when he entered their bedroom, he noticed something strange: Rebecca's phone, left unattended on the nightstand. Normally, she kept it close, always checking for messages from Alex or friends. But tonight, the phone sat there, facing up, with the screen illuminated by a series of recent text messages. At first, Tom hesitated. He knew it wasn't exactly his place to snoop, but something inside him nagged at him, a strange unease that had been growing for weeks. He picked up the phone, his hands trembling slightly, and unlocked it. The messages were innocuous at first, just casual exchanges between Rebecca and a few friends. But as he scrolled further down, something caught his eye. The tone of the conversation shifted. The messages between Rebecca and Emily, his son's girlfriend, were far more intimate than he had ever imagined. At first, Tom tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a friendly connection between the two women. He had seen them talking at family gatherings, and there was nothing unusual about that. But the texts went on, becoming more personal, more charged. There were compliments, flirtations, and even coded language that hinted at something far deeper than mere friendship. Tom's heart raced as he read more. It became clear to him that what he was looking at was something more, something much more dangerous. His mind refused to accept it. But the evidence was right there in black and white. His wife, Rebecca, had been involved in a secret affair with Emily for months. Tom couldn't comprehend it. He felt a surge of anger, disbelief, and betrayal wash over him. His first instinct was to confront Rebecca immediately, but he stopped himself. His head was spinning, and he needed time to process what he had just discovered. He placed the phone back on the nightstand and sat down on the bed, his thoughts racing. How long had this been going on? How had he been so blind? He couldn't understand how Rebecca, the woman he had trusted completely, could betray him in such a profound way. His mind kept returning to the fact that Emily, the girl his son had been dating for over a year, was at the heart of it all. The next morning, Tom's unease grew. Rebecca seemed distracted, her usual cheerfulness replaced with a cold distance. She was moving through the house like a stranger, going through the motions of everyday life, but not really present. Tom found it increasingly difficult to keep up the pretense of normalcy. As they sat down for breakfast, he studied her more closely than ever. Her eyes darted nervously, avoiding his gaze. It was as if she knew he was about to uncover the truth, and it was tearing her apart. Finally, unable to keep his emotions bottled up any longer, Tom decided to confront her. The moment came when Alex left the house for a study session with friends, leaving them alone. Tom sat down across from Rebecca in the living room, his heart pounding in his chest. Without a word, he handed her the phone. There was no need for explanations, the messages spoke for themselves. Rebecca's face drained of color as she realized what he had found. She knew, in that instant, that the truth was no longer something she could hide. At first, Rebecca tried to downplay it, claiming it was a mistake. Something that had just happened. She insisted it was nothing serious, that she had been going through a rough patch and had made a poor decision. But Tom's anger was all-consuming. He had been blind for so long, trusting her without question, and now he felt as though the ground had been ripped from beneath him. His words came out in a sharp, accusing tone, demanding to know why Emily, why the secrecy, why betray their family in this way. Rebecca, in a state of shock, couldn't provide the answers he needed. She was consumed by guilt, but the weight of the truth was unbearable. As the confrontation continued, it became clear to Tom that this wasn't just a simple affair. It wasn't just about infidelity. This was something deeper, more insidious. The more Rebecca spoke, the more Tom realized that the affair had become a twisted entanglement of emotions, guilt, and obsession. Rebecca's desire for Emily was not a fleeting moment of weakness, it was something she had come to rely on, something that had filled a void in her life that she hadn't even known existed. Tom, still struggling to process it all, found himself speechless. He couldn't wrap his mind around the idea that his wife had not only betrayed him, but had also involved their son's girlfriend in this destructive relationship. The revelation shattered everything Tom thought he knew about his family. His marriage, which had once seemed so strong, now felt like a house of cards, collapsing with every passing second. The trust that had taken years to build was gone in an instant, and no amount of apologies or explanations from Rebecca could pair the damage. The person he had loved and shared his life with had become a stranger, and the weight of the betrayal was too much to bear. As Rebecca sat there, broken and ashamed, Tom realized that their family would never be the same. The truth had come out, but the consequences were only beginning. What followed would be a chain of events that neither of them could have ever predicted. The following days after the confrontation were a blur of tension and unease. Tom and Rebecca hardly spoke, their once comfortable silence now replaced by a heavy, suffocating quiet. Tom couldn't look at her without feeling a mixture of betrayal and confusion. Rebecca, on the other hand, seemed lost in a whirlwind of guilt and self-loathing. She had expected Tom to be angry, but the coldness in his eyes was something entirely different. It was as though she no longer existed in his world, just a shadow of the woman he once loved. Their son, Alex, remained blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing under their roof. Rebecca did her best to maintain some semblance of normalcy, cooking dinner, helping with homework, and pretending nothing was wrong. But every time she looked at Alex, a deep pang of guilt tore through her. She couldn't bear the thought of him finding out what she had done, how she had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. The thought of him knowing, of seeing his disappointment and heartbreak, was more than she could handle. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca tried to salvage something from the wreckage of her marriage. She told herself that she was sorry, that it was a mistake, and that she would do anything to make things right. But deep down, she knew that the foundation of their relationship had been irreparably damaged. There was no going back to the way things had been before. Her mind kept drifting to Emily, the woman she had been so drawn to, the one who had pulled her away from everything she thought she knew about herself. What had started as a fleeting moment of passion had turned into something more profound, more consuming. Emily wasn't just an affair, she had become a part of Rebecca in a way that was impossible to erase. But Emily wasn't ready to let go either. Rebecca had become her escape, the one person who made her feel alive in a way no one else did. Emily knew that Rebecca was struggling with the aftermath of their affair, but she didn't care. She had wanted Rebecca from the start. And now that she had her, she wasn't about to lose her. She began to push harder, demanding more of Rebecca's time, attention, and commitment. She would send late-night texts, messages filled with longing and desire, making it clear that she expected Rebecca to keep their bond alive, no matter the cost. Rebecca tried to distance herself, telling herself that she needed to focus on her family, on the mess she had made. But the pull to Emily was magnetic, and every time Emily reached out, Rebecca felt that familiar rush, the excitement, the warmth, the escape from her increasingly chaotic life. She found herself answering Emily's messages with a mixture of guilt and yearning, each interaction a reminder of the dangerous path she had walked. Then, one evening, Emily showed up unannounced at the Carmichael house. Rebecca had been at home alone, trying to keep her mind off the growing tension between her and Tom. The doorbell rang, and when she opened it, there stood Emily, her face a mixture of defiance and desire. "Let's talk," Emily said softly. But there was an urgency in her voice that Rebecca couldn't ignore. Despite her better judgment, despite everything that had happened, Rebecca let Emily inside. The conversation quickly escalated. Emily didn't want to hear excuses, she wanted answers, assurances that Rebecca wouldn't abandon her, that the affair would continue, that their connection wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It wasn't long before they were arguing, their words cutting through the silence of the house. Emily was angry, her voice trembling with emotion. "You can't just leave me behind. You don't get to walk away from this." Rebecca felt trapped. She loved Emily, but she also hated what the affair had done to her life. She wanted to make things right with Tom, wanted to salvage her family, but Emily was relentless, refusing to let go. The conversation grew more heated as Emily's frustration turned into desperation. She wanted Rebecca to choose her, to leave her husband, to make a commitment. She wasn't content with being the secret lover anymore, she wanted it all. And she made it clear that Rebecca had to decide her family or her. In the midst of the argument, Rebecca snapped. The pressure of trying to balance her crumbling marriage, her feelings for Emily, and the looming threat of her secret being exposed pushed her to the edge. Her emotions, already frayed, boiled over. Without thinking, she reached for the knife that had been left on the kitchen counter. She didn't mean for things to go this far. It was an instinctive reaction, a sudden surge of panic and rage. Emily, startled by the sudden movement, tried to back away, but it was too late. Rebecca, in a blur of emotion, thrust the knife toward her. The room went silent in an instant. Emily crumpled to the floor, blood staining the kitchen tile as Rebecca stood frozen, the weight of what she had just done crashing down on her. In that split second, everything became clear. What had started as a moment of passion had spiraled into something far darker, far more tragic than she could ever have imagined. Emily's lifeless body lay before her, and Rebecca, in a daze, couldn't comprehend what she had just caused. Tom arrived home a short time later, expecting nothing more than the usual quiet evening. What he found instead would change everything. The house, once filled with the sounds of normal family life, was now still eerily silent, except for the sounds of his own heart pounding in his chest as he looked upon the horror that Rebecca had unleashed. The scene that Tom walked into that evening was one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. As he opened the front door, a chilling silence greeted him. The house was still, too still, and the air seemed thick with something unspoken. His mind, clouded with the dull weight of betrayal, had been replaying the confrontation with Rebecca over and over, trying to process the hurt, the anger, the confusion. He had hoped desperately that things might improve, that maybe they could find a way through the wreckage of their marriage. But what awaited him was beyond anything he could have prepared for. As he stepped further into the house, he saw Rebecca standing motionless in the kitchen, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her clothes were stained, and her hands trembled as they hovered near her sides. His eyes immediately followed the trail of blood that led to the lifeless body of Emily, sprawled across the floor. Emily's eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling, her once vibrant presence now a cold and haunting memory. The sight hit Tom like a physical blow, the shock rendering him speechless. The knife, still gleaming with blood, lay on the floor next to Emily's body, a horrifying reminder of the violence that had unfolded just moments earlier. Tom's legs gave way, and he staggered backward, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. He had just found out about the affair, yes, but this was beyond comprehension. Rebecca didn't speak at first. She stood there, her body trembling as if she couldn't believe what she had done. Her eyes were fixed on Emily, but there was no remorse in them, not yet. There was only a numbness, a surreal detachment from the reality of the situation. She had never imagined it would come to this, never thought she would be standing here, her life destroyed in a single moment of madness. Tom's shock quickly turned to anger. The grief and betrayal he had felt earlier morphed into something darker, more dangerous. His eyes flicked between Rebecca and Emily's body, and he felt a growing wave of rage. How had it come to this? How had his wife, the woman he had spent over 2 decades building a life with, descended into this violent madness? His voice shook with fury as he finally managed to speak, demanding to know what had happened, what had pushed her to this. Rebecca could barely form words. She looked at Tom with hollow eyes, her breath shallow. She tried to explain, tried to make him understand, but her words were fragmented, lost in the sea of emotions that had overtaken her. She talked about the affair, about the obsession, about how Emily had pushed her into a corner. She confessed to her guilt, but it was clear to Tom that she wasn't fully processing the enormity of her actions. The tension in the room was unbearable. Tom's mind was still reeling, unable to make sense of the chaos in front of him. His son Alex was due to come home soon. What would he think? How could he ever explain this to Alex? The thought of their son, finding out the truth, feeling the weight of his own girlfriend's death on his shoulders, it was too much. Tom's stomach churned with the knowledge that their family, whatever it had once been, was gone forever. Without warning, Rebecca collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her body shook with the weight of what she had done, but there was no relief, no catharsis in the tears. The damage was done, and there was no undoing it. Tom stood frozen for a long moment, unable to move or think clearly. He knew he needed to call the police, that they needed to leave the scene as it was, that this was no longer just a domestic dispute, it was a crime, a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. But part of him, the part that had once loved Rebecca so completely, wanted to protect her, to shield her from the consequences of her own madness. But reality set in. There was no escape from what had happened. There was no way to hide the truth, no way to fix what had been broken. He couldn't protect her this time, not from this. Slowly he reached for his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed the number for the authorities. He knew the call would change everything. The sound of sirens, arriving only moments later, filled the house. It was a sound that Tom would never forget, cold, final, and full of dread. Officers swarmed in, quickly assessing the scene and taking control. Rebecca was arrested on the spot, her hands cuffed behind her back as they read her rights. Tom stood off to the side, unable to speak, unable to process the horror that had just unfolded. As they took Rebecca away, Tom felt a crushing weight on his chest. He had lost everything: his wife, his family, and any semblance of the life he had worked so hard to build. The realization hit him in waves, each one more intense than the last. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. This was the end of a family, of an entire future that had been so carefully planned. Alex would never understand, and Tom would never be able to make him understand. The damage was irreversible. In the months that followed, the media would descend on the Carmichael family, turning their tragedy into a sensational story that captivated the nation. The headlines, the speculation, the courtroom drama, it would all unfold in front of the public eye. But for Tom, the story had already ended. His family was shattered, and nothing could put the pieces back together again. The once perfect life he had known was gone, and all that was left was a painful, devastating memory of what could have been.